Welcome back, and today we're going to talk about a 7-part series. We're going to do episode 7 today, and we're going to have this series called A Blast from the Past, and we're going to talk about the Speedway, the top Speedway riders of the 70s. If you like the content of this channel, please subscribe, and we're going to talk more about A Blast from the Past. We're going to start a 7-part series today, episode 7. We're going to count down to the first episode, the top riders of the 70s. But first, we're going to go ahead and we're going to start with countdown number 75. Number 75 is the only non-Speedway rider in this episode. We have to pay homage to this guy because he was famous. He was probably more famous than most Speedway riders of the day. And who is that? It's Gene, the dancing machine. Gene was a fixture at the Costa Mesa Speedway. Everybody loved Gene, the dancing machine. And what was he famous for? He was running around the stands, walking on the wall, and he was yelling, "More beer!" Goal! Even to this day, Gene, the dancing machine, he's helping Speedway. He's donating money to help the races during pandemic times. There is really the number one super fan, the first super fan. And we thank you so much, Gene, for all you do for Speedway and have done since the 70s. And that's Gene, the dancing machine. Number 74 was the most famous Speedway rider to never complete a race. He was a lot of fun. Everybody loved him. He was just a hoot and a holler and a really good guy. And who is that? It's Tumbleweed Walton. Tumbleweed Walton passed away a few years ago. Rest in peace, Tumbleweed. He was a crowd favorite. Everybody loved that guy. When Larry Huffman would announce Tumbleweed would be coming out to race, everybody was standing and they were going to see what was going to happen. I happened to be a D3 rider at the time, and he raced next to me, and I looked over at him one time and said, "Oh my God, if this guy falls on me, I'm dead." Moving on to number 73, best top rider in the 70s. His father owned one of the most iconic restaurants in the Garden Grove, Anaheim area. They served the Southern catfish food. It was famous, and I happened to be childhood friends with this guy. I grew up in the guy's house, jumping bicycles off the house into the pool. He was a great guy. His number was 125, and that was Paul Belial. As a little kid, I used to go to those motocross TT races over there at the OCIR Raceway, over there in El Toro. Paul passed away a few years ago, rest in peace. I'm good friends with his wife Eileen, and we all love and respect Paul. Paul was a good guy. He was not competitive like some of us. He was just a sweet individual, having fun, racing Speedway. Paul Belial was a really good guy.
2, 1.
Number 72 in the countdown, he was a good rider. He was a Baja rider, and he was a supercross mechanic, and he was a member of the AMA Hall of Fame. This guy was good. And who was that? He was number 98, Chris Haynes. Even though Chris didn't race Speedway for a long time, he was a good rider. Chris was just a good guy, and he's alive and doing well today. And number 72, that's Chris Haynes. Number 71, top rider in the 70s. I used to see him over at Fairchild's in Pasadena, California. He was working on the car. I think he was an employer for Jerry Fairchild, and he was a good Speedway rider. And who was that? That was Jim Rogan. Number 70 in the countdown, he was a good rider. His number was, I think it was like 100. He was racing in the 70s. I have a picture with him, me, and Wild Bill Cody. He was good. And also, in the 2000s, he was racing Speedway. I was racing him in the 2000s. And who is that? He was a good rider. His name is Rick Farron. Moving along to number 69, he's a friend of mine on Facebook, and he started Speedway with a bang. He was really good in the 70s. He did a great job. He was racing all the top riders. And who is that? His name is Dennis Armstrong. Number 68 in the countdown was a Speedway rider, but he was better known as a referee. He was a decent rider, but he stopped and he became a referee. He had lots of arguments with all the top riders in the 80s. He was really a good referee. And who was that? It was a famous Irwin Moon. Number 67 was a famous guy. He was an uncle. His name was Uncle Harlan. Do you know who this guy is? He was famous. He got the Bass brothers involved in the 68 Whiteman Stadium, letting him ride the JAPs. And he was a rider from like 68 all the way to like now. This guy's an old timer. And he's an oldie but a goodie. And we pay much respect to the famous Harlan Bass. Number 66 was a good rider. He's an arch rival of mine at Santa Ana. And in the World Qualifier in Northern California, he got in this horrible accident and he got paralyzed for life. I turned around, I saw the accident. It was just a horrible situation. And he eventually died from his injuries. And he was a good Speedway rider. This guy was solid. He could ride. And that's Porky McCabe. Rest in peace. Number 65 was a rider that most of you probably never heard of, but he was a good rider. He got to D1. He was solid. You know, I raced against a guy, and that guy was hauling butt, and that's Doug Skiles. Number 64 was a guy, I think he wore no gloves, and he wore a half-face helmet, and he was just a rough and tumble guy. He was a good D1 rider at Costa Mesa. Every once in a while, he'd be the dark horse, and he'd win a handicap main. And who is that? He was Keith Tennis. Number 63 top rider, he was a pretty good rider. I'm not going to talk about him too much because he was a guy that I know really well, and that was me. I didn't race a long time at Costa Mesa in D1. I just got to D1 just 1 year. They had the rider strike. My sponsor, Jerry Fairchild, was the president of the SRA. He made me leave the Speedway at the Costa Mesa. So I only had 1 full year at Costa Mesa. But in that 1 year in D1, I won 6 handicap mains. And perhaps my best main I ever won was a handicap main with Bruce Penhall at the Ventura Speedway in Ventura, California. Penhall was tagging me for 3 or 4 laps. He was right on my butt, and I ended up pulling that win. That was probably my best win of the year. And probably another thing that I will probably remember, or maybe be famous for, is through Jerry Fairchild, I was the last JAP rider to win a Division I in the United States handicap and scratch main event on that old JAP. We're going to do a countdown all the way to number 1. And next show, episode 6, we're going to start with 62, best rider in the 70s, and we're going to work away all the way to number 1. So thank you so much for hanging out with us today in the Hive with the countdown, and we appreciate you subscribing to the channel, hanging out with us. We appreciate you, and we're going to look forward to seeing you next time.
Go!